So, Renato, what's the biggest news this week?
This week, it's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet.
Let's start with our favorite lawyer of all time, Rudy Giuliani. And all I have, my main response to this topic is just my cringe face.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I just did not, if you asked me at any point this week, up until the moment that lawsuit dropped, that Rudy Giuliani would have the biggest legal news of the week, I would have probably bet my house that was not the case. We literally had a verdict that found that Trump committed sexual abuse, very serious, right? You've got Santos gets indicted for all sorts of criming, right? I mean, it's like, what crime didn't the guy commit? And then, or allegedly, I should say, what allegedly commit. We got the Durham report is finally released after years of fanfare. And the biggest legal news is Rudy's on tape, and he's on tape like, I mean, it's just the sort of, first of all, the offenses are so vile.
Vile is really the only word. I mean, I don't even have words. Like, I'll be honest with you. Like, I read the initial parts that kind of summarized the stuff, and I was like, I can't really get into every single detail that's here because it's disgusting. Disgusting. Shocking.
I mean, he raped her, right? I mean, that's
repeatedly.
And she's got a lot of this on tape. Like,
yeah.
I mean, she couldn't have her phone on her at all times. Okay. But like a lot, like, I mean, she was basically recording him nonstop, and some of the stuff he was saying was crazy. And then, by the way, like, as a side note, he's selling pardons with Donald Trump and splitting the proceeds. Like, that's just like a throw-in line. I mean,
so let's unpack this a little bit. This is a lawsuit brought by an employee of Rudy Giuliani, Noelle Dunphy, who is bringing a civil lawsuit under the same statute that E. Jean Carroll filed. This is an act for adult survivors of sexual assault and abuse. And I forget how much in damages she's asking for. I mean, several million, 10 million.
She deserves a lot. So if she can prove all of this,
she deserves a lot.
She deserves a lot in damages. Yeah.
So essentially, Rudy Giuliani, according to her lawsuit, offered her employment, offered her to pay her an enormous sum of money. I think it was $1 million, and to represent her in some legal matters with her ex-partner, with whom she had ongoing problems because she's basically a survivor of domestic abuse from that relationship. He then tells her that because of his own divorce, he's going to have to defer payment to her until a later point in time. So there's this weird way in which she has this kind of sort of Damocles hanging over her, right? Like, in other words, he's kind of holding this out as something that she needs to stay in this relationship for, because she's going to get paid. She's getting this legal representation. If she leaves, then, all of that presumably will go away. And it sounds like pretty soon after her employment begins, he essentially begins sexually assaulting her. She says that he was drinking at all times of the day, and basically demanded sexual satisfaction from her at all times of the day. Initially, I think she wants to go report it, and he essentially says, nothing will happen to me because I'm friends with the president. And so this continues on. And then, as you note, she is also privy to all of his communications that he's having, including, with Trump. And somewhere in this, as you note, he drops to her that he and Trump are selling pardons for $2 million a pop and sharing the proceeds between them.
Yeah, just as like a side note, it's just like throw it in there. Like, well, by the way,
I don't even know where to start.
But it's sort of like it is kind of lost in the shuffle because, as I said in the beginning, she's got him on tape. So like she'll be like, has this recorded conversation saying all sorts of like really heinous things that we're not going to repeat. And you're just like, oh my God. I mean, I always thought Bill O'Reilly was like kind of one of the sickest people remember when he was on tape with his sexual harassment of his employee. And this is this makes Bill O'Reilly look like a saint. I mean, this is.
And she alleges that he is making racist and misogynistic and anti-Semitic comments all the time too, which I think are also on tape.
Yeah. And just to be very clear, I mean, obviously this is an exploitive situation. Okay. And it's obviously sexual harassment and all sorts of things. You could put all those labels. But on top of that, just to be crystal clear, she's alleging forcible rape, like a violent crime here. Okay. The allegations are that he's literally physically forcing her to have intercourse, or oral sex and so on with him.
So this, Renato, this seems to have happened like within the last several years. Is she really beyond the statute of limitations for criminal charges? I would think that the NYPD would have to investigate this at this point.
I think that they would. Now, just to be fair to them, on the federal side, we often were, investigating things that we didn't have brought to our attention. I would see something in the Wall Street Journal, and we would, inquire about it. I'd inquire with the SEC and get a file open, that sort of thing. That's different than the situation that most state prosecutors find themselves in, and obviously police, because unless an officer sees something in front of herself, happening, like, okay, she sees somebody get assaulted, they are, generally very busy trying to prosecute all and bring to justice all of the crimes that are occurring in a particular jurisdiction. Whereas the feds can sit back and pick and choose and say, oh, we'll let the state handle this one. Like the state is kind of usually buried in cases. So, I had a sexual assault matter that I had handled in New York, and it was hard to get the detectives' attention because they have a lot on their plate. So I'm not sure that they're going to pick up the phone and do this, but I certainly think if it was reported, there's no question that they would look into it. It's within the statute of limitations. So I guess kind of the broader, I think the broader question that a lot of people are going to be asking is, will the feds look into this? Right? I just said a moment ago that that pardon allegation, of course, that's a federal crime, right? That's trading an official act, it's just a pardon, for a private benefit, which is money. So that is just bribery, theft of honest services, whatever you want to call it. That's clearly illegal. And the question is, will the feds investigate that? I don't know, is the honest answer.
And does she have that on tape?
I don't recall.
It wasn't clear to me.
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me either. So what was interesting, and I think this is, she's got a lot of things on tape, to her credit. I mean, she's pressing record way more than the average person would do. Obviously, it must be easier when, the person you're taping is completely drunk all the time. But, so she has a lot on tape. But of course, she doesn't have everything on tape, right? When he's forcing her to perform oral sex on him, she doesn't have, a phone recorder or a videotape, recording that, which is understandable. Similarly, she hasn't recorded maybe every conversation about pardons. She does say, and I guess this is a separate point, she has access to all of his emails, including, was it like something like 17,000? That the number streaks in my mind, but thousands of emails between, him and Trump, and all sorts of other lawyers, Mark Lucchese and other, lawyers who are involved in folks in the Trump world. That's a very significant issue. I mean, frankly, among Giuliani's other problems, not having a very good handle on and properly protecting client confidences is sort of a separate issue that he has. But she may very well have evidence of what she's claiming. But I think it remains to be seen because, we have often, allegations are made. Trump makes allegations all the time in lawsuits. Lots of people make allegations in lawsuits, and they are what they are. Anyone can make an allegation and say something in a lawsuit. In fact, because you can't get sued for defamation for what you allege in lawsuits, it's often free reign. But here, where there's recordings, or at least there appear to be, she says that there's recordings and there's quotes around things that Giuliani's saying that are pretty precise. It has a lot of credibility here. And so I think this story, the reason I think you were right, Asha, that this should be the first story is, if there are legs here, and it sure looks like there are, I mean, the allegations are incredibly serious. And who could have imagined this back in 2001, right? When Giuliani was on the cover of Time magazine and everyone thought he was, superhero. This is unbelievable. He's essentially, if the allegations are true, he is a violent criminal.
Yes. And the selling of pardons, I mean, look, we've already have the allegations that Trump was dangling pardons in the Russia investigation in order to entice people to remain silent. We also have had these weird, solicitations, reports of solicitations for pardons come up in a lot of different contexts. Do you remember when Matt Gaetz was going to Roger Stone when he was under investigation? So like the weaponization of, or kind of the use of the pardon power by Trump as a way to benefit himself, either to shield himself from criminal liability, to ensure loyalty from people, now to possibly make money is just, this is sort of, it's not astonishing, I would say, but it really gets to how much he abused his power. Even apart from whether this allegation is true, we know he, and more recently he claimed that he was going to pardon all the January 6th people if he becomes president again. And, if this allegation that he was actually selling them, that there was bribery, and I think you said this would also be theft of honest services. I think the question is not only, whether the feds will look into it, but I mean, how could you allow him to assume the office again? And frankly, it made me think that this is sort of a reason, this is an argument in favor of being able to impeach presidents even after they leave office, which, because things may not come to light until later. You may not have time to uncover evidence of abuse of power or actual high crimes until after the person leaves office. I'm not saying it's going to happen in this case. I mean, but it is an argument for it.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes the most sense when someone like Trump loses after their first term and is planning to run for a second, right? Otherwise, I'm not sure the United States Senate is going to spend its time, stop everything, for, an ex-president. Whatever. Jimmy Carter did something, let's stop the presses, right? But I think here it's obviously very important. I think one thing that I wonder, Asha, and I don't think we know this, is this something the Justice Department might pick up at some point, on that end of things? And it's interesting. I thought to myself, if this was like let's say a clerk at the pardon attorney's office who's like, you know what, I could totally get stuff stamped, it says pardon or whatever, or I can get it in front of the president in exchange for $1 million or $2 million. Would that be investigated? The answer is absolutely. If the allegations about that came out, that would definitely get looked at. So why not here? And I think, opening an investigation into Trump is a big deal. And I think it's very apparent that Garland is concerned about optics with the Justice Department and its appearance of not being politicized. We can talk about that more when we get to the Durham report. I think if this could get added to or was part of Jack Smith's ambit, that's one thing. Like if Jack Smith's like, hey, let's add this to what I'm doing, I could see that happening. But otherwise, like, I don't know if I see Garland opening up an independent investigation into this when Trump is already under investigation for a number of other things.
I think it depends on what comes out. I mean, right now we have an allegation in a civil complaint. If that's all there is, that she heard Giuliani say this, I think I might agree with you, but I think given the attention, and we've got a lot of investigative reporting, and who knows, Lordy, there might be tapes,
Right.
and there might be other stuff that comes out, and I think at that point, I mean, there would come a point where I think he would have no choice but to, if there were clear, articulable facts that suggested that he had actually used this power for financial gain.
Yeah, I mean, if there's audio of Trump discussing selling pardons for cash, you would like to think that would disqualify him for the presidency, and no irrational person would ever support him. But of course, we know that's not the case. Certainly, you would think that a criminal investigation would be initiated at that point. So, Asha, I have to think if we were ranking our favorite people to talk about, Rudy would be high on that list, but George Santos has got to be up there too. I mean, he's an entertaining character.
Yes, he is up there, and I have to say, I tweeted this, and it's a good segue from Giuliani, because I said, I feel like in my bones, I feel like the George Santos saga will have as much entertainment value as the Four Seasons Total Landscaping debacle. Because it's so crazy. It's just so ridiculous, and he is so ridiculous. Like, I mean, I think he is suffering from something, because he does not seem to register what is actually going on, and I think believes that he can simply lie his way out of this. Like, he's just like, fake it till you make it all the way.
So, yeah, I mean, George Santos reminds me. So I actually understand. I feel like I understand George Santos very, very well.
Really?
Because I spent many, many years of my life investigating fraud and getting to know those folks very well. Some more than I would like. One of them tried to put a hit on me one time, a fraudster. But I also have represented people allegedly, accused of committing fraud or allegedly engaged in fraud. So I understand the personality type well. George Santos is a fraudster, and fraudsters believe their own BS. They've learned at a certain point in their lives that they can just sort of lie their way through things, and they get really good at it, and they understand how to manipulate people, and there are never any consequences. They just do more and more and more. And I think George Santos ends up in like 20 years as like either a Netflix movie or a Hollywood movie where everyone's forgotten about Santos. Like, you and I remember him. Okay, we're at the nursing home in 30 years or whatever. But like, no one else remembers Santos, and everyone's like, can you believe there was a congressman who actually was in office for X number of months before he was convicted? And he did, he was crazy. There's some random fraudster lied his way in. He'll tell his whole story, and it'll be very entertaining to people in 2078 or something like that.
It'll be like inventing Anna.
Yeah, it'll just be like, wow.
Except George Santos. He also reminds me of Clark Rockefeller.
Oh,
do you know this story?
Yeah.
He reminds me completely of Clark Rockefeller, who, by the way, I remember from the original Unsolved Mysteries episode.
But it's like, that's a great example, right? Like, he's just walking everywhere. Yeah, I'm a Rockefeller, and everyone just accepts that for what it is, right?
Yeah. So let's just unpack these charges real quick. There's basically 3 fraudulent schemes going on in this set of charges. I expect that there will be more that come. So one was that Santos was essentially appropriating money that people were contributing to what they thought was an organization for his campaign. And he was basically taking that money and using it for his own personal use, luxury things, clothes, cars, whatever.
I would say that slightly differently. I mean, the allegation, I think, is that he defrauded them by tricking them into contributing to a company rather than to his campaign, falsely claiming it was going for the campaign, and he was having them contribute amounts that were far exceeded what they could have contributed, right? Federally.
So he had a company called DeVolder Inc.
His real name, yeah.
And he had a person working for him who was actively also, he was directing to solicit these contributions. And these were huge contributions, like in the, like $25,000 and things like that, like big donors that were coming. There's a great annotated New York Times article, there's a New York Times piece that has an annotated indictment where the people who are just listed as contributor 1 or contributor 2, they provide some background. The second fraudulent scheme was that he was collecting unemployment benefits during COVID. He was like, it wasn't clear. I don't know, like it's in the title. Like if you're employed, you probably aren't going to qualify for unemployment benefits. Meanwhile, he voted against people getting unemployment benefits just like last week, I think, right after this came out.
Yeah, Mr. Santos would be best off saying as little as possible, but he can't help himself. Fraudsters always like to talk their ways out of things. That's one of their downfalls. And I mean, he also, I think, said that, Congress's standards were so low. He said something to the effect like Congress's standards are so low that, he exceeded them, right? Like something along those lines. It was just very revealing, I thought.
And then the third fraudulent scheme was that he lied in his financial disclosures to the House of Representatives, where he weirdly overstated some income and then he omitted other income and the sources from it. So it's all very sketchy. And what's really strange is when you juxtapose this with the unemployment benefits, he was claiming unemployment benefits for the same time that he's disclosing to the House of Representatives that he was getting income.
Yeah.
From certain sources and the amounts. I mean, it's so dumb.
Well, fraudsters have to, they usually have different sides of themselves that they're showing to different people. And I think, he wanted to portray himself as successful. So that's why he had overstated at certain points. That was in his interest. Then he realized, oh no, I need to do the opposite. And so he was trying to hide certain things. Yeah. What a mess. That guy, I think we all knew it was going to end up somewhere like this. Kudos to the Eastern District of New York team that put together charges so quickly. I have to say this is one of the fastest prosecutions. Yeah.
And kudos to the investigative reporters who were quickly reporting on this as soon as he got elected, because I think that was, to me, that was clearly what jumpstarted these federal investigations. And in many ways, the fact that he won is what ended up exposing him, because had he lost, and because no one was paying attention to him before he won. And if he had lost, I don't think anyone would have paid attention to him either. And he may have just walked away and just started some other grift.
Agreed. If he had lost by, a substantial margin, no one would have paid attention. I mean, I do wonder, I think the Democrats in that area need to ask themselves questions about how they were not able to uncover this with Oppo research and stuff during the campaign, right? It would have, I think, saved a lot of heartache for folks if that had happened. But I think that you're right. The investigative journalists who uncovered this are directly responsible for this. I think otherwise this wouldn't have happened. And I think they also make it very, very difficult for Santos to defend himself, because Santos, the touchstone in a white collar case, which is usually, and they're usually fraud cases, is whether or not the defendant can take the stand. Okay. And a lot of times the defendant can, because it's like, hey, it's some businessman, and, he supposedly lied on when he signed some forms, but, he's going to say, hey, I wasn't paying attention to what was on these forms or whatever. In a case like this, there's no way Santos could take the stand. He lied about so many things. He can't keep his story straight. And he's lied about all sorts of other stuff. So it's going to be very easy for prosecutors to trip him up, and they've got the goods on him in so many different ways. So the fact that he can't take the stand essentially dooms him, I would say, in this case. It means that a guilty plea is going to happen. But usually in these fraudsters, speaking from experience, it happens like, 4 hours before the trial is about to start or something like that. After I've spent many hours and weekends and sleepless nights preparing my witnesses and getting my exhibits together and writing my opening statement, that's usually when they decide to plead guilty.
Yeah, and it's not even like the evidence against him here are other witnesses. They, which of course there will be, but it's really a paper trail, right? Like these are actual transactions. Like he's moving money from, this is the wire fraud, that he is moving money from this company to which people made contributions believing they were from his campaign into his own bank account. He has, he's filled out official forms, which are attesting to the fact that he, is not making X amount of money, or he's unemployed or whatever, and, getting those benefits. He submitted a form to the House of Representatives attesting to the fact that, all of these facts are true to the best of his knowledge. So it's hard. What's the defense? Like the Justice Department has the receipts, literally.
Yeah, it'd be very challenging. I think, it's just the set of charges itself is very challenging for him. Obviously, prosecutors always love that evidence of, a spending spree, whatever you want to call it, luxury items that the money actually went to. One thing, though, I do want to mention before we move on to the next topic, Asha, is one of the things I found very funny is Santos has been trying to play like the Trump playbook. Right. He thinks that like everyone's going to treat him like on the right, like they did Trump. He's like witch hunt and all this stuff. And, he's trying to start it up and no one on the right's having it. Like basically Trump got a pass because he was Trump. He was president. Like they had too much at stake. So they felt like they had no choice but to roll with it. But like they're not rolling with Santos. He doesn't matter enough.
Yeah. Trump in their view delivers votes. That's why they can't alienate him.
Yeah.
Right. It's purely transactional. This is what Trump mobilizes these freaking lunatics and they come out and vote for him or try to overthrow the government or whatever he tells them to do. And so they're both afraid of that group. And they also need those people to show up and vote, because as their policies become increasingly crazy and extreme, there's more and more attrition. So, of course, this impacts, they have to make the process even more, rigged and constrained to keep people from voting, but they also really depend on that group coming out to vote. DeSantis isn't bringing out anyone to vote. Literally, no one cares about this dude.
Yeah, literally. Although I will note,
except Elise Stefanik, apparently, I guess. She
and
loves
McCarthy,
him.
right? I think it's funny. McCarthy's not willing to throw him over the, overboard yet because he wants that additional vote. I guess it's that hard. Like Santos is a reliable vote. It's hard to get the majority to pass things he needs. But yeah, their patience with him is very limited. Let's put it that way.
So, Renato, after we recorded our podcast last week, we almost re-recorded it because there was a big news dump that night about the verdict in the E. Jean Carroll trial. Now, it's really hard for me to actually believe that was just 1 week ago, because that was dominating the news. She got a very hefty damages award, and immediately following that verdict, the very next night, CNN had a town hall featuring our favorite former president, Donald J. Trump, where he re-defamed her and potentially re-defamed her.
It's like a new word.
In addition to making a few key confessions that could be relevant in his criminal investigations, but in any case, potentially opened himself up to liability, I guess, on a number of fronts. So let's unpack.
Yeah, so I guess it's a starting point. Obviously, it's a big deal that Trump was found liable for engaging in sexual abuse of E. Jean Carroll. I mean, I view that as complete and utter victory for E. Jean Carroll. There was some focus for a brief period of time that the jury did not find that she had been raped, but had found instead sexual abuse. I think it's important for everyone to know that in New York law, the definition of rape is very narrow. And also, I think what happened, I think this is actually a good thing for E. Jean Carroll in the long run, is that the jury was parsing the evidence very carefully. And they really credited her statements at the time to friends, in contemporaneously around that time, she was telling friends that there had been some, a non-consensual encounter with Donald Trump, but she didn't use the word rape. And so I think they were crediting that testimony to get her over the bar in terms of a burden of proof. The bottom line is, it was a perfect storm. She had great lawyers, and she presented a compelling story. The judge, I think, had some very good rulings, and obviously Donald Trump sunk himself, as we talked about in his deposition. So very significant verdict. So, or judgment for her. So where do you go from here? Well, okay, yes, he is continuing to defame her. And why is that, and what does that mean? Well, ordinarily, my usual.
And can we just rewind and say what it was that, he basically on the CNN town hall called her a liar again.
Made fun of her. Said it didn't happen.
Yeah. So I just wanted, because there were a lot of people who didn't like, I happened to find out about this afterwards because I did not watch the town hall, but just in case people didn't watch it, I thought it was worth noting.
I didn't watch it either. I watched the clips. I got the gist. I watched the clips that people made of the key moments. I've seen enough of Donald Trump. But in any event, so that's awful that he did that. He didn't learn his lesson. And so the immediate reaction was, okay, is there going to be another lawsuit and so on? Now, my immediate response to that was different than a lot of commentators. It's very easy to get like a bazillion likes on Twitter if you're like, hey, yes, this is defamation again. And it is. There's a practical problem. In 99 out of 100 cases, there would not be another lawsuit that's brought. Why? Because the millions of dollars that E. Jean Carroll was awarded makes her whole, compensates her for the damage that occurred up until the point of that trial. And so now any damage she has to go forward, right, from that point. So there's not it's challenging to prove like how you were damaged when the president of the United States called you a liar and all of that, and you've already been compensated for that. So like he called you a liar for the 100th time, and that what's the new damage, right? And lawyers are really expensive. Okay, I don't think the average person has any idea how much like a firm like Robbie Kaplan's cost, but I bet we're talking seven figures for that representation easily, multiple seven figures potentially. So going through all that again, and by the way, it would have to be most likely in the District of New Hampshire because that's where that occurred. It wasn't like it even occurred in New York. So she, the question is, could she go back to the same judge? But an interesting thing happened. Robbie Kaplan, her attorney, E. Jean Carroll's attorney, has come out and they're like saying they're seriously considering whether or not to bring another suit. Why are they doing that? And what's really going on? Well, I think there's a few things going on to explain why this may be the one case out of 100. One thing is, I think that they believe there's a strong chance that they could get punitive damages. So I think they're thinking that would be their damages hook. It wouldn't be what was called actual damages, where like she was reharmed. But the punitive damages are essentially a type of damage a jury can award that punishes.
So is it, and with the theory of the punitive damages for him doing this within 24 hours, simply based on he's just being a jackass now, kind of? Is it just like, like he's trivializing it? I don't know. Like what?
I think it would be that he's trying to, I think the argument would be there's been a judgment by the jury that she was sexually abused and that he defamed her. He's been awarded this judgment. And very shortly thereafter, he has re-victimized her by defaming her again and belittling her and so on and so forth. And I totally get that. I think that that's all true. I still think that that's a challenge. Like if somebody is paying out of pocket, I just say this as somebody who is a partner at a mega law firm and represents a lot of clients. Like that's the sort of thing, like I would say to most clients, like, do you really want to spend millions of dollars in legal fees in the hope to get them back effectively in punitive damages. It's just something you're doing more for the principle of it. But I also think there's a chance, and I think it's clear that Robbie Kaplan thinks there's a chance that they could go back to the same judge and try to do it there until it eventually gets moved away and try to get some estoppel finding, essentially saying, we've already tried the case. We've already determined that he's sexually abused her, so we don't need to go through all that again. That's a big deal because it reduces the cost tremendously. It also reduces the downside because, there is a downside. If you had to retry the whole case again, it's not, you can't be 100% sure, and different jury in New Hampshire wouldn't have a different result.
Right.
So I also think my personal take on this, though, is that it's actually being done for leverage. I think typically in a case like this, there'd be a long appeal, and usually the parties would settle. What would happen is E. Jean Carroll's lawyers would go to Trump's lawyers or vice versa, and they'd say, okay, we'll give you, if you pay us 70% of the verdict now, we'll just, we'll agree to, waive the appeal, that sort of thing, to just get that over with instead of fighting for years and, incurring more legal fees. But Trump's not going to do that. He's going to fight till the end of time because this isn't about the money and he doesn't care about that. And so this might give them some leverage, like, hey, do you want to fight us again and again and again? And so it gives them another chit at the table that they can use and say, we're going to keep going after you. We're going to keep creating these headlines. We're going to keep creating this inconvenience. We're going to keep distracting you. So I don't know. It's interesting. But it's definitely a case where there's an upper hand. A lot of our listeners would say that Trump's never held accountable for anything. Well, he was. That he abused E. Jean Carroll many years ago. He defamed her, and he is going to pay the price for that, or and he is in the process of paying the price for that.
Yeah. Well, the saga continues, and I, just given that we are, and by the way, if people are noticing that I'm wearing different clothing, I don't know if your outfit has changed.
It's not, because I go to the gym and then I wear a hoodie. And so I always look way worse than you, Asha. So that's just, I always do generally look way worse than you. But in particular on our podcast, if you're watching it on our YouTube channel, because I'm always wearing a hoodie right after I get back from working out my trainer. And Asha always looks like she's whatever, ready to be on a magazine cover.
Well, yesterday I was giving a talk because I had on a blazer. And
you look very,
and a nice
very
dress, and today I'm wearing my sweater hoodie. But we just had so much news this week that we had to extend our recording day because we wanted to get to the E. Jean Carroll trial. And I have to say that just to bring this full circle to the first story that we covered about the Giuliani lawsuit, this is, I think the verdict is an important vindication for E. Jean Carroll in just having a jury just say that this happened.
Agreed.
And I think that it is, I don't know, I mean, it's obviously the Giuliani lawsuit would have been in the works before this verdict came down, but I have to think that something like this helps encourage people to come forward. I mean, not necessarily lawsuits, but also just it goes beyond E. Jean Carroll, I think, is my point.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think another impact is shout out to the legislators in New York who gave women an opportunity to bring cases like this years later, recognizing that women don't always aren't always in a spot where they can report and take action right away when they've been the victim of violence or sexual assault. They gave her that opportunity, and I think it might inspire legislators in other states to consider doing the same thing and giving other women the opportunity to be vindicated and, as you say, to be heard and believed.
Definitely.
So, Asha, we have the biggest legal news of all time. I mean, if Fox News is to be believed, or Ben Shapiro or any of those people, Jon Durham emerged from under a rock and issued a 330-something page report, which I'm sure you couldn't wait to read cover to cover.
Yes, and I had my suitcases packed because I was sure that as a peddler of the Russia hoax, I was going to be arrested and sent to Gitmo, which is also something that I had, that Fox News had promised. I think the Federalist released a extensive list of people who had peddled the Russia hoax, and I was pleased to see that I was in very good company. All of those people I would have been happy to, bunk with and do party with at Gitmo. But unfortunately, no one showed up. And once I read the report, I realized why no one showed up, because it turns out no one did anything illegal.
It was basically a long Federalist article.
It was
like
a long Federalist article. It was like with sad tuba playing in the background. Wah, wah, wow. So look, this is a long report, and I really do have like limited emotional bandwidth, to be honest with you. I went down the rabbit hole during Durham's first case that he brought. So he brought two prosecutions in the 4 years that he did this investigation. Neither of them were against the FBI or anyone else in the deep state. They were random people no one had ever heard of outside the FBI.
He had one guy who was a lawyer who supposedly lied. Yeah.
Well, one Sussman was a lawyer, and then there was another guy, Igor Dichenko, who was a subsource on the Steele dossier. Like I said, I mean, it was very in the weeds, and he charged them each separately with making false statements under the theory that essentially that they were peddling, stuff that they knew was false as in an effort to get the FBI to open this investigation. And the subtext was that they were doing it kind of on behalf of the Clinton campaign. So, there was this whole other narrative that he was trying to get in. Unfortunately for Durham, he got left out of court both times. The jury acquitted both defendants.
And that was an amazing, I'll just say this as somebody who's tried a lot of criminal cases. That's an amazing result. Okay. I was like, when I got an acquittal against the DOJ, I thought it was like, this is like a career moment. Like, it's such a big, so hard. And my client was like literally actually innocent. And it was very hard to convince a jury of that. There's no joke. And you're right about the laughing out of court. I think, what I would say is like the judge, I believe in both cases, or made comments as to why this case was there, or why this case was being brought. And I think in one of them rebuked Durham for using the case to try to get in a narrative that really had nothing to do with the facts of the case.
That's right.
Correctly.
That's right. They were both, I mean, he had to do something. I don't think he could end this investigation without charging anyone with anything. So, I mean, in some ways, I guess he had to bring these bad cases. And as you said, I think, the Justice Department's policy is to not bring charges unless they are pretty certain that they can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that typically the evidence they have is like overwhelming, which is why I'm sure it's hard to secure an acquittal for a client if you're up against the Justice Department. And so basically, these were two losers and two loser cases, I guess. But anyway, so he has to, under the special counsel regulations, produce a report at the end, which explains his decisions for charging and declinations to charge. Same thing. We saw this in the Mueller report. I can't believe this report was actually almost as long as the Mueller report. Given the substance, it's kind of crazy.
Well, the substance, yeah, I think there was, it's a very, I think there's a very interesting contrast here in a number of respects. You made a statement which, and I totally agree with you. I get what you're saying, that like he couldn't do this, he couldn't finish this without charging somebody. But like, that really cuts to the core of what a prosecutor is all about. Prosecutors, you have an immense power that you have, and you're supposed to exercise it with restraint, and you're supposed to have this discretion. And Robert Mueller, in my mind, was the epitome of that. I mean, I know a lot of our listeners are, sick of him or very disappointed in him. One thing I admired about him, and I can't criticize about the guy, is like he showed an extraordinary amount of restraint, right? Like he had Trump on the obstruction of justice counts. He did something I wouldn't have done, but he went overboard to try to show, like, be super fair to the guy and say, look, I'm not going to render any sort of conclusion. I think there were a number of cases that he potentially could have charged, but he charged winners, and with one or two exceptions, where he was charging, like, I think a Russian entity and so forth. He was enormously successful. Lots of guilty pleas and verdicts. They won a trial against Manafort, Stone, and others. Very significant results out of that investigation, because I think he was very careful, judicious, and thoughtful about what he charged. He was also careful about the language in his report. I often am teaching young lawyers how to write, and I use the Mueller report sometimes as an example because I think it's one of the finest pieces of legal writing that I have seen. It is extraordinarily well written, and the amount of care and craft that went into it is very significant. And when you compare it to the Durham report, I mean, it's really something. One thing that Mueller did that I think had an impact was, Mueller refused to use the word collusion because it didn't really have a legal meaning in this context. He used a higher standard of conspiracy in criminal law, which is much harder to prove. And that was correct legally to do. But Durham's out there saying, oh, there's no evidence of collusion, which is just like a Fox News talking point. It's not a legal conclusion at all. I mean, there's just a number of times through his report where he betrays that his real goal is to sort of make headlines, not to do anything legal. There's another point where, he has this whole section about his, quote, observations. What's that about? I mean, prosecutors don't make observations. You either charge people or you don't. A very problematic report in general. And I think really, if you actually take the time to read it, which is clear a lot of right-wing commentators have not, I think you see something that, I think, a Federalist article is a better comparison. It has more in common with the Federalist article than it does with the Mueller report.
Yeah. It's a rambling mess. It is a real rambling mess. Like there's it's very hard to follow. There's no clear roadmaps, legal writing with roadmaps. That's something that the Mueller report did. So here's what we're going to tell you. And here's, systematically. And this is just sort of all over the place. It seemed to me to be a lot of filler, like, kind of laying out, like writing out all these FBI policies or whatever. Because one thing that this was the implicit charge was that he was supposed to cast doubt on the entire basis of the Russia investigation.
Correct.
This has been the talking point since the beginning, that this was not a properly predicated investigation. And so he does a lot of sleight of hand in terms of, so first of all, what one thing that I thought was interesting is, we've been hearing for years this allegation that the Crossfire Hurricane was opened because of the Steele dossier.
Right.
This is clearly not the case. And this report makes that abundantly clear, that this was opened because of information that was provided to the FBI by the government of Australia, because one of their diplomats, who, by the way, I understand is a leading politician or like someone close to the Conservative Party in Australia. Like, in other words, this isn't like, some ally of the Clinton campaign. Yeah. What overheard Papadopoulos bragging that he knew that, Russia may have dirt on Hillary Clinton, which showed that he had advanced knowledge of the fact that they had obtained these this hacked information. Right. Prior to that, the DNC server had been hacked, and it had been attributed by the intelligence community to Russia. There were people who were being appointed to Trump's campaign that were on the FBI's radar as people who had been targeted by Russia. Carter Page and Paul Manafort, who had connections. So all of this is, you look at this whole thing in context, but what Durham does is he pulls out that tip from the Australian government, by the way, acknowledging once and for all that it was not open based on the Steele dossier, but he basically says this was not enough to open a full investigation on. And he goes on and on and on. You get to page 295 of 306, and he says, basically, like, I'm not saying that there shouldn't have been any investigation at all. I just think it should have been a preliminary investigation, not a full investigation, and limited to George Papadopoulos. It was just a very splitting hairs, weird thing that comes very much later after he's already muddied the waters and he weaves in the Steele dossier in some other way and basically produces a hot mess that gives enough for, I think, the right-wing ecosystem to pull out little pieces and claim victory.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that too. I mean, first of all, for something that didn't have anything to do with the opening of the investigation, he nonetheless spends a ton of time talking about the Steele dossier.
Of time.
It's also worth noting that a preliminary investigation can become a full investigation.
Correct.
I don't think he denies that. Also, though, it's worth noting a lot of what he talks about there was already laid out by the Inspector General, and the Inspector General found, looked through all the same stuff. And who's, I'd say, very well-respected individual who was very critical of some decisions the FBI made, but nonetheless found that the full investigation was appropriate to open. And I really viewed his report more as his own spin on the Inspector General investigation. That's really what I took it to be. Like, here's my spin, here's my opinion on the Inspector General investigation. And I don't really view that as a proper prosecutorial function. I just view that as, he's really trying to be Inspector General 2.0 and offering his own spin on it. But it does serve an important function. I mean, one thing I will just make sure everyone knows, because a lot of people listening to this may not follow this, but if you follow all the right-wingers on Twitter, or if you go to their websites or TV shows, they are treating this as if it is the biggest thing ever. I mean, one of the big refrains was that they were talking about is this is bigger than Watergate. This was a coup, this sort of thing. And these are headlines that they probably had prefabbed, stories they had ready to go out before the report came. And I think it's just that, just like the clips in the Jim Jordan committee that you and I have talked about, Asha, that where it's like, hey, the whole point of the clip is just to give something that looks official. Like, let's put a Fox News guy as a witness. So now it's a government testimony as opposed to just some guy in Fox News saying it. This is similar. It's like, okay, let's put our Fox News guy writing a 300-page report with a seal from the DOJ. So now we can advance these narratives.
Yes. And there's stuff in there that is simply misleading and inaccurate. Like, there's a whole section, for example, where he talks about how the FBI never gave a defensive briefing to the Trump campaign. And I saw some right-wingers quoting from that. They did give a defensive briefing in August of 2016. It's been reported on. The 302 that was written, or whatever, the EC that was written by the agent has been published and declassified. They didn't specifically tell the Trump campaign that they got a tip from the Australian government.
Right.
But they did say you are going to become, or if you're not already, a counterintelligence target. And here's what that looks like, and here's why that's bad. And please report any strange outreach or contacts to us. I mean, they did do that. But he makes it sound like the FBI did not give the campaign a fair shake. He also mischaracterizes the covertness with which the FBI conducted its investigation as sort of, nefarious, when at some points he acknowledges that the reason they were doing that was because they were trying to avoid impacting the election. They were conducting a counterintelligence investigation, and had they gone and announced to 50 people that, hey, looks like the Russian government is targeting you, and that became news, Like, that would have been more detrimental to the Trump campaign. I don't really understand, like, what his point is. The reason they were doing these confidential sources and stuff is trying to stay under the radar, which, by the way, gets to his last point, which is they treated Hillary Clinton more favorably than they did Trump. I mean, and this is just laughable.
Yeah, that is his big argument. I'd say a big thesis.
It's
interesting because, of course, Hillary Clinton's campaign was in many ways destroyed or undermined by the FBI.
Yeah, exactly. What he does is he latches on. He ended up going through like all the CIA's files, and somewhere in the bowels of the CIA, he finds in a report of Russian intelligence analysis. In other words, are obtaining analysis done by the Russian intelligence services that says that Hillary Clinton plans to stir up a scandal about Trump being connected to Putin.
Mm-hmm.
He acknowledges that the intelligence community was not able to verify the accuracy of the substance of that and believed that it could be potential disinformation that was put out there. Right. However, his argument is they didn't run down that lead, but they ran down this Australia on diplomat lead. And by the way, how do we know? He called that Russian intelligence the Clinton campaign plan. Like, he basically gives it full credence. And he says, did they ever think that the tip from the Australians could be a part of the Clinton campaign plan? Like, it's just this weird conspiracy theory and just ignores the fact that you had two candidates, one of whom was vocally sympathetic to Russia in a very unusual way. And that, combined with all the other factors, made that combined with the source of the tip, made it a more credible allegation to look into.
Well, also, I think it's another important thing to keep in mind is that there was a very substantial hack and release of information that it sure looked like a foreign power had something to do with, right? And there, whether or not you credit the Russia, if you're listening, that sort of thing, nonetheless, there was, I think, a very, that event, I think, also lends credence to concerns about Russian interference, or at least foreign interference.
And they had attributed that to Russia, I think, by June of that year, before they opened the investigation into Crossfire Hurricane. Anyway, I mean, we're touching on a lot of different things, which to our listeners might be like, I can't even keep up. Like, what are you talking about? And that's basically how you feel after you start reading this.
Yeah, and that's really his purpose. I mean, one thing it's a frustrating thing. I mean, I've really kind of held back, Asha. I considered like writing threads and trying to convince people. And it's just like, I don't think anybody who actually is paying a lot of attention to the Durham report is interested in facts and interested in being convinced of it.
No, I think you're right. So, Renato, before we go, you mentioned that you're always coming back from your workout before our podcast. And I think like very early on, we talked about our exercise routines, but I'm curious what you're up to these days as we head into beach season.
Yeah. So I moved out to the suburbs a couple of years ago, and ever since my weight went up, I live in a house with a teenager. There's always a lot of bad things around. And I was away from my trainer. I had a trainer in Chicago help me lose a ton of weight. And I would see him 5 times a week when I was in Chicago. So living out in the suburbs, didn't have him. And so now I'm like decided I'm getting back in shape. And so for the last several months, I work out with a personal trainer most mornings. And I'm doing like lots of, like stuff really focused on like movement muscles too, just trying to get a lot of functionality in my core and lower part of my body. So I'm like always moving. I have like a disease that makes it hard for me to move sometimes. So I really am working hard on that. So it's been good. I'm getting results, not as fast as I'd like, maybe because I can't, especially with traveling with work, I can't control completely what I eat, but it definitely means that I am half exhausted or out of breath or sweaty or whatever when we're doing these podcasts.
Yeah, that's interesting that you do it in the morning. So I rejoined my gym in January. After, whatever, it's been 3 years almost since COVID, because I had been doing a lot of home workouts.
Yeah, I've seen that online. Like you were like doing, I don't have that. I do a crappy job. I like give it like a 10% effort when I'm home doing my own workouts.
I think
maybe.
I give it more than a 10% effort, but definitely I can feel that I'm making more effort when I go to the gym, partly because I do a lot of classes. So
that's good.
I do like kind of these turf classes where you're doing, kind of HIIT type of workouts and with weights and things like that. I've also started doing spin once a week. And I hate spin. Like, I find riding the bike to be the most boring freaking thing. And it's uncomfortable. The seat hurts my butt.
That's what I was going to say. It's just, it totally hurts my butt all the time. It's
uncomfortable, but I sweat more and burn more calories doing that than any other exercise. So what I do is I force myself to just go on Mondays and do the spin. And then I kind of feel like I've done my hardest thing for the week. And then everything else is sort of downhill. And the other thing that I've discovered is I've abandoned trying to work out in the morning.
What? Okay, I have to work out in the morning because I come up with excuses. If it's later in the day, I'm busy at work. I got this going on, that going on. I just make excuses. I don't do it.
Well, my gym, and this is why I rejoined it, is on my way to and from work. And I feel like my mental energy and focus is the best in the morning. And that is just a better time for me to do things like writing or record our podcast or, do the things that require my mental and intellectual energy. And then I can zone out. And because I do classes, I just kind of go in zombie-like and I just do whatever they tell me to do.
Well, that's definitely me. I do whatever I'm told to do. I need somebody screaming at me, telling me to do stuff. Like that's, I don't enjoy it. I'm just candid. I don't really enjoy working out. I've done tons and tons of it. I do high intensity interval training. I've done all that, but like, it's just, now somebody needs to tell me what to do. And I'm half asleep in the morning, so it works okay. It wakes me up.
I'm half asleep too. And that's like part of it is that by the time I have my coffee and kind of get to like, if I were to work out, my day wouldn't start until like 11. And then at that point, I'm kind of the good time for me to write and do all those things is sort of starting to fade. So I've just learned some little hacks to kind of maximize like my personal, rhythm in a way.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about. We'll talk about it next week. Like what I think as you get older, you get better at understanding yourself and like how to hack your own life to sort of accentuate your strengths and disguise your weaknesses a little bit.
I read a lot of productivity books. So
cool.
That was the one thing where I just kind of like gave up on stuff like waking up at 5 a.m. and trying to work out immediately after you get up. I was like, this is just not me. It's not happening. So.
Well, there you go. I made it work for me, but not me either.
MSW Media.